In a single castle in Hungary, whispers claimed over 600 girls entered and never returned. This is the story of Countess Elizabeth Báthory, the woman history branded the Blood Countess. We'll trace the line between myth and truth, from noble power to accusations of sadistic ritual. And when you hear how her life ended, it will shatter every expectation. If youth could be preserved through an unthinkable act, would people still seek it? Share your thoughts, and as you watch, consider how society judged one woman accused of paying that terrible price. What makes a legend endure for centuries? For Elizabeth Báthory, the answer is blood. By the 18th century, pamphlets circulated across Europe claiming she bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth. This lurid detail, though never proven, transformed her from a local scandal into an immortal Gothic monster. When you picture a pale noblewoman immersed in a crimson bath, that image comes not from evidence, but from sensational retellings written decades after her death. Still, the myth persists because it speaks to primal fears, aging, vanity, and unchecked cruelty. Legends thrive when they mirror society's darkest obsessions. The truth, however, is far more complicated than the myth suggests. Every villain's tale begins with privilege, or power denied. Elizabeth Báthory was born in 1560 into one of Hungary's most influential Protestant families. Her relatives included powerful nobles, judges, even a king of Poland. This lineage gave her wealth, land, and immense political weight before she was even married. With such privilege, whispers of scandal carried consequences far beyond her castle walls. Her name alone was untouchable, and accusations against her could shake the balance of power in the kingdom. That status also meant protection, until protection became impossible. Imagine being wed not just for love, but for empire. At age 15, Elizabeth married Count Ferenc Nadasdy, a soldier known as the Black Knight of Hungary. The union merged two powerful dynasties, expanding their influence across vast estates. While Ferenc fought in brutal wars against the Ottoman Turks, Elizabeth managed the castles and servants. This responsibility wasn't unusual. Noblewomen often oversaw estates, but it placed her in a position of unchecked domestic power. Reports suggest she was fiercely intelligent, multilingual, and adept in politics, but absolute authority over dozens of dependents created fertile ground for abuse. Behind closed doors, cruelty could be hidden under the veil of nobility. Marriage cemented her dominance, but also set the stage for her infamy. Neighbors whisper long before courts intervene. Servants who worked in Elizabeth's household told of punishments far harsher than the norm. Accounts describe beatings, burnings, and humiliations inflicted for the smallest mistakes. Some suggest her husband even taught her new tortures during his military campaigns, blending battlefield brutality with domestic discipline. Yet, in a time when noble households regularly punished servants harshly, drawing the line between severe and sadistic was murky. Were these rumors exaggerated by jealous rivals, or were they warnings ignored until it was too late? Rumors are society's early alarm system. First, it was a servant girl, then another, then dozens more. By the early 1600s, villages near Sejte Castle whispered that their daughters never returned after entering the Countess's service. Some were promised respectable work, others were simply lured by the prestige of serving a noble household. For peasant families, losing a daughter could mean losing both hope and survival. Yet complaints rarely reached authorities because challenging a noble was dangerous. Power silenced voices, and fear suppressed truth. Still, disappearances leave trails, empty homes, grieving parents, unanswered questions. When too many vanish, silence becomes impossible. What if cruelty masquerades as ritual? Eyewitness accounts claimed Elizabeth's punishments went far beyond discipline. Testimonies described needles driven under fingernails, flesh bitten until it bled, and girls forced into freezing conditions until death. Some stories detail elaborate ceremonies, as if violence itself became a performance. Others suggest she believed blood possessed mystical power, a twisted form of alchemy. Whether exaggerated or true, these accounts horrified investigators because they suggested method, not madness. Repeated cruelty becomes ritual, and ritual breeds legend. How does a rumor become the defining image of a person's life? The infamous claim that Elizabeth Báthory bathed in the blood of virgins first appeared decades after her death, in lurid accounts designed to shock. No trial record ever mentioned it. Historians argue it may have been propaganda, amplifying whispers into monstrous legend. Yet the idea endured because it fused two universal fears, aging and cruelty. The bath of blood became shorthand for vanity pushed to murderous extremes, and once an image takes hold, it is nearly impossible to erase. Powerful scandals demand royal attention. In 1610, King Matthias II ordered two trusted nobles, György Thurzo and his men, to investigate the Countess. This wasn't charity for peasants, it was politics. The crown owed Báthory's family money, and her downfall could cancel debts. What began as whispers suddenly became a high-stakes inquiry, fueled as much by financial motives as by justice. Investigators collected hundreds of witness statements detailing horrors inside the castle walls. But how much was truth, and how much was scripted to satisfy the king? What's more convincing than a witness under oath? Dozens of servants testified against Elizabeth, claiming they saw beatings, mutilations, and corpses hidden in the castle. Some confessed to helping dispose of bodies. Others described girls locked in cellars until death. Yet many historians caution these statements came under duress. Torture was common in the 17th century investigations, and frightened servants could say anything to save themselves. Still, the sheer volume of testimony painted a horrifying picture of systematic cruelty. Even if half was exaggeration, the truth was already unbearable. On December 30th, 1610, investigators stormed Chait Castle. Inside, they claimed to find dead girls, dying prisoners, and torture instruments. Elizabeth was confined to her chambers, shocked by the betrayal of her own household. For the first time, the untouchable noblewoman was cornered by forces greater than her family's power. The symbolism was striking. The Countess, accused of bathing in blood, was now caged within stone walls. Accounts differ on what investigators really saw that night, but perception was enough. Once a monster is named, proof matters less. Sometimes objects speak louder than words. Inside Chait Castle, investigators reported finding mutilated corpses, half-dead prisoners, and ledgers recording names of girls. Some claimed a servant even kept count of victims, a grim list stretching into the hundreds. But scholars argue much of this evidence came secondhand, with no surviving documents today to verify the numbers. The absence of proof has fueled centuries of debate. Was Elizabeth a mass murderer or a convenient scapegoat? Either way, the image of blood-stained chambers cemented her fate in the public imagination. How do you judge someone who never stands in court? Elizabeth herself was never allowed to testify at her trial. Instead, the proceedings focused on her servants, who were interrogated and executed for their roles. Witnesses painted her as the mastermind, but she had no chance to answer. Historians question whether silencing her was strategic. A real trial could have exposed flaws in the accusations, or embarrassed powerful nobles. By keeping her locked away, the court ensured her voice never challenged the verdict. Justice in the 17th century was swift and brutal. Elizabeth's closest servants, accused of aiding her crimes, were tortured and executed in public. Some were burned alive, others had their fingers torn off before death. These punishments were designed not only to eliminate accomplices, but also to send a message. No one, not even noble staff, could escape the king's justice. Yet the servants' testimonies had been the backbone of the case. By erasing them, the court also erased the possibility of contradiction. The dead cannot recant. For the Countess herself, the sentence was imprisonment within her own castle. Bricked inside a set of rooms, with only small slits for food and air, she lived in isolation from 1611 until her death in 1614. Stripped of power, wealth, and freedom, Elizabeth became a ghost, haunting her own fortress. Some accounts say she raved against her captors, others that she accepted her fate in silence. Either way, the once feared noblewoman died alone, buried quickly to avoid public outrage. Death came quietly for the woman once accused of monstrous excess. In August 1614, Elizabeth Báthory was found lifeless in her prison chamber. Reports say she had complained of cold hands the night before, only to be discovered dead by morning. Her body was initially buried at Chait, but villagers demanded her remains be removed, fearing her presence even in death. Eventually, she was interred in her family crypt, though the exact location remains uncertain. Some claim her coffin was hidden, others that it was destroyed. Even in death, she could not rest. What if the real motive wasn't justice, but politics? Elizabeth's trial conveniently erased enormous debts the king owed her family. With her imprisoned, her vast estates and wealth became easier to control. Enemies within the Hungarian court had long resented her influence, and silencing her ended a power struggle. Historians argue that while evidence of cruelty existed, the scale of her crimes may have been inflated to justify her downfall. Truth and politics rarely walk hand in hand. How do we separate truth from centuries of retelling? Some scholars insist Elizabeth Báthory's crimes were exaggerated, pointing out that no reliable records confirm the hundreds of victims often cited. Others argue the testimonies, however flawed, still reveal undeniable patterns of cruelty. Over time, details blurred into gothic fiction, turning a stern, powerful noblewoman into a vampire-like villain. The bloodbaths, the towering victim counts, the supernatural aura. These elements speak more to storytelling than to courtroom reality. Yet, myths often shape memory more powerfully than facts. What began as scandal became spectacle. Writers in the 18th and 19th centuries turned Elizabeth into a character of Gothic horror, inspiring plays, novels, and later films. She became a prototype for the female vampire. Her story echoed in works like Bram Stoker's Dracula. Modern horror still borrows her imagery. The noblewoman who feeds on youth, the castle filled with shadows, the allure of eternal beauty paid for in blood. In a way, her infamy outlived any truth about her deeds. Stories gave her immortality. Was Elizabeth Báthory a sadist or a scapegoat? Accounts describe her as cold, calculating, and fiercely intelligent, but not insane. Some modern psychologists suggest she displayed traits of narcissism and psychopathy, an obsession with control, lack of empathy, and possible compulsive cruelty. Others argue she may have been mentally unstable, shaped by trauma, isolation, and the brutality of her era. Still, much of this portrait is reconstructed from hostile sources. Without her own testimony, we can only guess at her mind. Motives vanish when the voice is silenced. How differently would history have treated her if she were a man? In 17th century Europe, noblemen were rarely punished for atrocities against peasants. Yet Elizabeth's case became a spectacle, her crimes framed not only as cruelty, but as unfeminine monstrosity. A woman accused of sadism threatened patriarchal norms more than a man ever could. Some historians argue her downfall was amplified by gendered outrage, an attack not just on her deeds, but on her defiance of female expectations. Power is tolerated until it comes from the wrong person. History loves to rank its monsters. Elizabeth Báthory is often called the most prolific female serial killer, with alleged victim counts dwarfing those of later figures like Jack the Ripper or Gilles de Rais. But comparisons stumble on one problem: evidence. While 19th century killers left police files and newspapers, Elizabeth's story survives through testimonies shaped by torture and politics. If even half the claims were true, her crimes eclipse many infamous names. If not, she stands less as a murderer and more as a cautionary tale of myth-making. Legends inflate numbers faster than facts. 4 centuries later, the Blood Countess still casts a shadow. She appears in novels, metal lyrics, horror films, even video games. To some, she's a feminist icon twisted by patriarchy. To others, a symbol of unrestrained cruelty cloaked in wealth. Her story reminds us that history isn't only what happened. It's also what people choose to remember, retell, and exaggerate. Whether murderer or martyr of rumor, her name endures in ways her accusers could never have imagined. Stories give immortality. Elizabeth Báthory's story straddles the line between reality and nightmare. Some evidence suggests she committed horrific acts, yet much of her legend was shaped by politics, rumor, and Gothic imagination. That duality is why she endures, not just as a name in court records, but as a symbol of a fear, vanity, and power gone unchecked. Was she the world's most prolific female serial killer, or the victim of a smear campaign that twisted her into a monster? The truth likely lies somewhere in the shadowy space between. And if this tale of power, cruelty, and myth fascinated you, stay tuned. Because the next story unveils another noble whose downfall shook history to its core. Monsters wear many faces.